There is the old story that probably gained some distinction by the return of our election season about the Southern gentleman who was warned of the danger arising from the wrong candidate getting into office. He received a prolonged harangue on this subject with all the fearsome details, and finally someone who didn't think he was sufficiently perturbed said, "Well, don't you worry about these things?" The colonel replied rather quietly, he said, "I would worry, only I can't keep my mind on it." Now, in our present way of life, some good things, but many unhappy circumstances arise from the fact that we can't keep our minds on what we're doing. The mind has a tendency to escape us, and as the reward for this, we have had a sharp rise in industrial accidents, and we might say accidents in every department of life. Yet it is very difficult, as most people know, to simply exert the power of the will over the faculties. We can say to ourselves, tomorrow morning I'm going to do exactly this. And tomorrow morning when it comes, we do exactly that. Anything else beside the this we originally intended. Or perhaps by that time we've forgotten the entire subject. Lack of attention certainly reduces our effectiveness. It makes it difficult to study. It makes it difficult to do a good day's work. It makes it very hard for us to be interesting members of our own families. And lack of attention to larger public details will result in our being imposed upon in innumerable ways. We all recognize the importance of continuity of attentive faculties. But when the time comes to practice this, we simply lack the internal resource necessary. We would like to be thoughtful, but we are thoughtless. We would like to be prudent, but under some glamour of the moment, we lose our prudence. We would like to be able to recall the details of a transaction when those details might be of the greatest importance to us. But unfortunately, they did not sufficiently impress our minds at the time. Therefore, the details are not available. We look around us in nature for certain symbols that may be helpful. And while I'm not by any means a militarist, I do point out that in the Army, when an order is given, the regiment is first brought up to attention. They are told to stand there, open their minds, and wait. Something is going to be said that they must hear. So the officers call them from indifference to attention. Now, in private life, there is no one to call us to attention. We have to achieve this for ourselves, and for the most part, we fail completely. In the Western cultural life of man, we have moved forward with strain and awkwardness. We do everything desperately, and attention is forced upon us sometimes by the very crises that arise from failure to be attentive. We therefore have come to the conclusion, parents take this attitude toward their children, that all they have to do is be attentive when they're told to be. But we have no background to suddenly take hold of the mind or the willpower and cause it to do anything. We have for centuries as individuals lived in a kind of security which has not demanded continuous observation and reflection. When emergency arises, we rush for help to experts who listen to our story with some measure of attention, but not very much in most cases. The result is the expert's advice does not arise even from the best levels of his own knowledge. The Oriental thinking in this has some interest for us. It is very different from our way, but like so much of Eastern ideology, is comparatively painless. Attention to the Eastern thinker is one of the many byproducts of a way of life. Attention cannot be adequately cultivated all by itself. Perhaps theoretically it could be, but the person will lack the motives. He will lack the consistent impulses necessary to maintain attentiveness. Now, of course, we use indifference or a certain detachment from circumstances as a means of protecting ourselves from numerous interruptions or from ideas which we do not regard as valuable or worth our time to consider. This cultivated indifference, however, must be very carefully disciplined also. It may become habitual, and we simply become indifferent to everything. And when we do that, we have lost censorship. We've lost discrimination. We have lost the ability to weigh that which is important from that which is not important. In the Eastern way of life, attentiveness is cultivated in the child. It begins early in life. It is simply a little ceremony of giving everything that we do or everything that we contact a certain amount of courteous recognition. Anything that is worth considering with the best faculties that we possess. If a thing is beautiful, it is worth admiration, not merely a passing glance, not merely a lip service. And in our way of thinking, we have frequently substituted lip service for actual consideration of a fact. We see something that appears to be charming, delightful, gracious. We say, it is lovely, and then pass on to something else. We have never really given it thoughtfulness. So attention is one of the products which arises from thoughtful living. Now, thoughtful living is the enjoyment of living. Probably some of us have had experience with this in other fields of endeavor. For example, the American people eat without attention. Eating consists principally of gulping. The mind is far away. The conversation at the dinner table has nothing to do with the immediate problem. And if there were not long handles on them, we'd probably swallow the fork and the spoon along with the meal. We simply give no thought to these things. We do not enjoy food. We do not know what it tastes like, because it goes past the taste buds at an incredible rate of speed. As a result of this, we develop the gobbling and the bolting procedure, and all of us overeat. We overeat because we do not taste food. We overeat because our mind is on something else and we are automatically shoveling it in. To the person of attainments in the area of good eating, this is as reprehensible as our politics. But to the average person, it is meaningless. It is, however, quite meaningful to an intelligent, well-cultivated, well-intentioned stomach. It means that the food reaches this digestive area totally unprepared for assimilation. Experience enters our consciousness in the same way. It flows in without consideration. It receives little or no attention. It is not censored or ordered. It is simply gulped. And when the time comes for us to benefit by some choice experience through which we have passed, the proper perspective on that experience is not available to us. One of the problems, then, is that haste is very likely to destroy attentiveness. The mind is very rapid in its function. Observation is almost instantaneous. But reflection, unless we are very highly skilled in it, is a slower and more painful procedure. Reflection requires conscious thoughtfulness. It requires that our attitudes be highly conditioned by previous reflection, by natural appreciation for things, and by an instinct toward the orderly acceptance and digestion of ideas. Lacking these specialized attributes, knowledge flows into us and we remain ignorant. Ideas rush by us and are not captured. Culture surrounds us. We drown in it, but we accept little of it. The development, therefore, of attentiveness results from a pattern, a habit, a discipline. If it is not set up in early life, then it must be slowly acquired in later years. How can we go about what might be termed the painless re-education of attention? Probably most persons possess a greater area of appreciation potential than they realize. To appreciate is a pleasant process. It brings with it pleasure. It brings with it a certain sense of achievement. And for the most part, attentiveness pays off in things we like. It makes life more enjoyable. It makes our own management of life more effective. Therefore, it is certainly worth more attention than we give it, more thought and consideration than we are commonly inclined to bestow. Why, perhaps, are we so lacking in attention in these times? Probably one answer is the rapid motion of situations around us. Our world is moving very rapidly. So many things are happening that it is almost impossible for the average person to become aware of all of them. We are sometimes uncertain as to where attention should focus. We read the morning paper and there are probably 50 items which might receive further attention, but we do not know which ones are most suitable to us. Actually, this is largely a matter of temperament. Man is so constituted that he is not going to be equally attentive about everything. Attention is a form of association mechanism. We become aware of things which interest us, or about which we have very strong and definite ideas. A general condition of the people of our nation at the moment would seem to indicate that very little interests them, because their attention does not settle into one pattern or bracket and remain there. More likely, therefore, our indifference arises from a general lack of incentives for interest, for attention. The most primary source of attention constructiveness will be in education. The child going to school, particularly in the earlier grades, lives in a world of wonders. In this world, nearly everything is fascinating, and the child reaches out for knowledge in every aspect of life. As the child grows older, this quest for knowledge is modified or restricted by certain large pressures that move in. The areas of interest are restricted by parental areas of interest. That which the parent discourages, the child may or may not have the strength to continue to consider. Also, patent answers which are glib and essentially meaningless, have a tendency to discourage attention. They substitute formulas for facts. They cause us to accept words rather than to continue to observe the processes occurring around us. There are innumerable formulas, statements, and prejudices and opinions which could not endure even an hour of thoughtfulness. Yet because we give them no attention, because we accept through the ears rather than through the understanding, we are frequently exploited and imposed upon, and many of the affairs of our lives are complicated to the brink of disaster. Consequently, we know that if we can substitute someone else's ideas for our own, we feel this is economy. We're saving our own thinking. We're saving it all right, but for what? In order that we may carry it to the grave unused. And this gives us very little consolation or security. What we probably think we are preventing is fatigue. Yet we also know that faculties seldom used fatigue most easily. And the individual who has not developed any attentive powers, suddenly faced with an emergency, exhausts his own abilities almost immediately and passes into panic. He is unable to cope with any situation because he has not learned to cope with situation as a principle in his own life. So to go back for a moment to our Eastern friends, their concept of attention begins with the simple concept or the simple idea that everything in the world means something. Everything that nature has produced is a key to nature. The search for essential knowledge is therefore through observation and reflection upon things around us. This does not mean that we should addict ourselves entirely to environmentalism or the idea that we can solve everything from environment. But it does mean that environment is a divine creation. It is a universe of law and order. It is a world filled with wonders and with beauty. And there is nothing that nature has produced that is meaningless. The artist has discovered this. He realizes the universe of wonders in the forms and colorations of things, and gradually becomes deeply immersed in the deepest emotional reactions to the sublimity of even the smallest and simplest of things. The universal message in the coil of a seashell can confound the greatest scientist. The wonders and glory of a green twig breaking from the branch of a tree, or a little shoot breaking through the earth. These things are wonders beyond man. Yet man, because he is surrounded with wonders, has ceased to enjoy them. He has ceased to appreciate them. In fact, he has ceased to realize that they exist. He has therefore turned his attention largely to the works of his own kind. But here again, his attention is not adequate. He uses his mind as a camera. He accepts pictures, but like the camera, he cannot digest what he accepts. There is much more to thinking than merely recording. There is a kind of reporting that must go deeper. Man, turning his attention to the achievements of himself and his associates in this world, usually fails to appreciate even these achievements. He fails to observe the action and reaction of natural procedure in the life of man. He does not appreciate the tremendous intuitive power of the great artist or the great musician. He does not accept the kindly ministry of fine art. He does not understand or respond to the subtle implications of great verse. He simply ignores the works of man essentially as he ignores the works of nature. They do not give him their meaning. They do not challenge him. They do not awaken him from the slumber of the commonplace. They do not make him suddenly realize that he is in a universe of purposes. Thus he drifts along through the years, suffering from the inevitable consequence of lack of attentiveness, and that is boredom. He finds life uninteresting, nothing but a sequence of problems and miseries and discomforts. He considers the achievements of other men as either unimportant or even ridiculous. He sees no purpose behind dedication or devotion. And that which he does not understand gradually changes in his own consciousness to a kind of contempt for true greatness, a contempt which we observe around us every day. Knowing, therefore, that this world is actually filled with wonders and sublime facts, we cannot entirely appreciate the individual who locks himself for many hours a day in front of a television set to watch programs contrived to annoy him, for that seems to be the primary objective. This kind of annoyance, however, has become habitual. It is like a peculiar kind of ache somewhere in the body. We are quite uncomfortable if it stops. We've become too friendly with it. It has become a member of our family. That we should enjoy these devices within moderation is perfectly proper. But that we should substitute these contrivances of man for the facts of life, this substitution is wrong. It is a substitution that limits ourselves, a substitution that gradually takes away from us the incentives to a fuller and richer relationship with values. So we start assuming that the person is somewhat deficient in this faculty because he usually is. And we say, what can we do about it? How can we improve this condition? How can we, in midstream of life, gain something of that natural enthusiasm about the mystery of existence which dominates the consciousness of the unconditioned child? How can we become again hungry to know, hungry to understand, and to advance the essential elements of our own lives? Probably one of the simplest ways is through early contrivances, because where we are not accustomed to any procedure, we have little affinity for it. We cannot suddenly say, I think I will enjoy attentiveness, and then settle down to be a really attentive person. It does not happen that way. There has to be certain discipline imposed by ourselves upon ourselves at the beginning of any enterprise. Man has perhaps inherited, atavistically at least, a rather romping temperament. He likes to play like the sheep in a meadow. He likes to enjoy life without restraint. And because he has this tendency to avoid or evade the organization of his own resources, he has had considerable trouble meeting the changes which cultural motion have imposed upon him. So we are not going to find a person, usually, who has a great and immediate, spontaneous ability to discipline himself. There's no background for this. He has been avoiding it all his life. He was disciplined a little in childhood. He is disciplined somewhat by the very processes of living. But he considers these disciplines as odious, and he escapes from them into what he terms the freedom of his own action as rapidly as possible. So to impose a discipline upon himself seems to be a kind of penance. It's a hair shirt, and he does not wish to hear much more about it. Yet, in every walk of life, success depends upon discipline. Somewhere in the development of the character of each individual, he must bow to law and order. If he fails to make this adjustment, he will remain unsuccessful. Each person must in some way subjugate his own nature to the needs of his own life. He must take the time. He must go through the efforts. He must gradually classify his activities and organize them for the very purpose of survival. In ancient days, discipline was given largely through a guild or apprenticeship system on the economic level. The individual learned by doing. And the story of apprentices in the 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, and even later, was not entirely a happy story. An apprentice was a slave, little more or less. He received practically no wages and a grudging keep. He was required to do anything that his master wished him to do. And it was quite natural that a great many masters of trades in those days had certain arrogance over their apprentices. They flogged them, they beat them, they starved them half to death. They made life as difficult for them as possible. Sometimes the apprentice was moved by a high sense of duty, and he kept on. If he had not this courage, he could not finally master his trade. His courage, however, was maintained by one simple fact. He wanted to make a living. He had to follow the traditional way. There was no escape. Either he stuck it out, or he became a derelict in society. And he observed those few who failed, and he did not want to be like them. So he took this punishment for 5, 7, 9, 10 years in order to gain his patent as a master, and then in turn probably to have apprentices of his own that he treated just as badly. This was a way of life. It was a hard way, but it produced the great craftsman. It produced the individual who was able to submerge his feelings, to place himself under a tremendous force of self-control. It was in a way almost as great a discipline as that of the early church, for it demanded and commanded. But the individual wanted to make a living, so he kept the faith as best he could. We have something of this kind arising again due to the complicated nature of modern education. We find that whereas 50 or 60 years ago, the 3 R's with a few embellishments were adequate for the average person, that knowledge has so complicated and intensified in recent years, that a complete education in almost any field today is a long and arduous procedure. The individual has to consider 18 years of schooling in order to be able to step out into some advanced and progressive industry. He must also continue to learn day by day. He must attend special classes and seminars. He must attend conferences. He must read new text. And the information that he had when he graduated is obsolete before he has been in practice 5 years. This demands a great amount of attention, and a certain group of persons give that attention. Grudgingly, it is true, but they give it. They give it because without it they cannot survive economically. But in this pressure of giving so much of themselves for tasks that are not really congenial, for ends which are not very clear, and perhaps become indoctrinated in ideas about which there is not much of faith or purpose. To go through this causes the individual to feel that he has taken about all the beating he wants to take on this so-called level of discipline. He feels that if he can ever escape, he never wants to open the book again, that he never wants to go on with this type of pressure. As a consequence, his private life becomes an escape from the pressure of his economic survival. To impose, therefore, upon his private life further discipline seems like compounding a felony. It seems as though it means that there is no opportunity left for the individual to live. Actually, education and many of these other brackets make this problem more difficult than it should be. In some mysterious way, we have taken all the joy out of learning. We have made it so clumsy and cumbersome a structure that the individual is in a state of constant resistance against it. This fault must sometime be corrected because it is not appropriate to the subject. Learning is life's most dramatic adventure, and there is no reason why it should gradually be reduced to a state of boredom and pressure as it is at the present time. This probably is a reflection in method of the older apprenticeship technique in which cruelty was too large a factor. But in any event, our private life now becomes an escape. It becomes an opportunity to let down barriers. We consider that we have earned the right to waste our private lives. We do it with a good spirit under the general term freedom. We really believe that we are so tired from work that we must play uproariously to compensate for this exhaustion. And in our Western pattern of things, this work and play pattern has come to so dominate everyone that resistance to it seems to be an effort to go against the prevailing stream of life. Discipline, however, in private or personal life is also extremely important. Gradually, industry and progress, particularly in the sphere of the development of automatic procedures, these progresses, so-called, are gradually freeing the individual as far as his physical time allotments are concerned. It will not be too long, probably, before we have a 6-hour working day. We will not probably go beyond a 5-day week, and we may sometime end up with a 4-day week. And if all else fails, we can multiply holidays to infinity. This procedure simply means that the individual is gradually escaping from work discipline. Now, this is not good. It is pleasant to contemplate the fact that sometime we can do nothing and be paid well for it, but this nirvana is not as practical as we may think. As our working hours shorten, our crime rate goes up. The individual who is freed from the burden of the discipline of making a living is thrown back upon the problem of self-discipline. And unless he does something about it, this lack of internal organization, given an opportunity of greater and greater time allotment, will get him further and further into trouble. Also, it is just as important to the individual to be happy in his personal life as it is for him to be adjusted in his business career. A person who has a well-organized business or belongs to some large corporation that is smoothly operating, at least theoretically, may not realize the disaster of going home to chaos, of going home to a situation totally unorganized. To him, this is merely rest. But out of this rest arises a continual pressure of confusion that is also expressed through its reaction upon the children. And young people in the average home today are without adequate directive or self-directive. They haven't purposes. They haven't insight. They have not learned from the beginning of life to share in the doing of those things which fulfill the human need on the level of advancement and culture. So the whole problem sort of falls to pieces to the degree that we become successful. So the organizing of our personal life is very important. Today, industry recognizes this importance as never before. It is maintaining a considerable staff of psychologists and psychiatrists simply to find ways of keeping valuable persons from destroying themselves outside of the office, to prevent them from getting into such personal tension patterns that they are no longer able to perform their various tasks adequately. Thus, the personal life flows in upon occupation, affecting it in various ways. Always, the individual's efficiency is measured by his own holistic nature, by his total control of the values of his own life. Without this control, the security of his economic status is continually threatened. Then we try to understand something of how to approach this in our daily living. There are little simple disciplines that we can use. These disciplines have to do with the ability of the person to begin to examine what he is, what he does, what he has. This type of examination depends for its success upon a few simple emotions. One of these is inquiry. Most persons are curious, but largely on the level of gossip. They are not curious about facts. They are not curious about truth or about beauty. Yet a natural curiosity is an open door to appreciation and value. The individual who is stimulated by what he sees, by the situations that arise around him, and as a result of this stimulation becomes attentive. He wishes to know more about something. He wishes to receive the impact of things a little more completely. He tries to understand the thought of the person who composed the music. Why was it composed? He tries to understand the meaning of some small art object that he possesses. He tries to penetrate the obvious a little bit in an effort to become more appreciative, more aware of the fact that he lives. Man's awareness of life arises from the stimulation of his internal faculties. Man is simply because he is aware. And if he wastes his awareness, he wastes his own existence. Man is man because he can question, can analyze, can think. And to the degree that he makes use of these faculties, they become the source of an interior enjoyment. They enrich him in everything that he thinks and does. He finds, therefore, that awareness feeds him. It is like a pleasant meal. It is like a beautiful concert or a group of friends coming in for the evening. He enjoys these things because they are invitations to a larger way of life. Why have we continuously, therefore, failed to be aware of these values? Probably because civilizations, individuals, cultures pass through cyclic procedures. They move from a kind of infancy through childhood and adolescence to a maturity. And up to the present time, Western man has been very largely adolescent in his attitude toward life. He is adolescent probably too long, because actually he is not so youthful that he could not begin to consider things more favorably. But he has this progressed adolescence, this perpetual kind of immaturity. He has it because he is built around certain centers of action and certain motivations which are not mature. As a result of this type of thinking, he has not developed the conscious realization of the need for a refinement of taste or a refinement of consciousness. He is still in a rather belligerent, competitive stage. He is still much more interested in accumulating than in using. He still belongs in that period of life in which he does not feel that he has the time to sit down and contemplate anything in terms of true value. Because he has not done this, because he has never really estimated value, he is content to go along without it. And like so many in the storybooks, he does not know that he misses or what he misses. That which he has never possessed, he feels no need to possess. This need, however, comes to him in a roundabout way. He certainly needs a greater amount of internal organization than he possesses. He is not adequate to the pressure of his time. The result is sickness. He needs peace of mind, but he does not know how to attain it. He needs peace of soul, but searches for it as he searches for any other kind of physical investment. He needs a certain relaxation, a graciousness in himself. He needs to experience himself as an enjoyable person, and he may even suspect that others would like to find him more enjoyable than he is. These needs are the needs of maturity. They are needs that are present wherever a civilization expects to develop into a culture. And either Western civilization must become a culture, or it must vanish because of its own barbarism. A barbarian can be strong and can conquer the world, A barbarian can control the treasures of the earth, but a barbarian is born and dies a savage because he cannot control himself. And that another great wave of life should pass through this dilemma seems unnecessary in the face of history and in the face of the available knowledge that we possess of how the cultures can be created and developed. One of the first things, perhaps, for us to try to do, therefore, is to become conscious of what is desirable. We must sit down, perhaps, every day for a time and try to understand what it is that would make us happy. Try to understand what changes in our own natures would be for the better as far as we are concerned. What do we like? What do we truly enjoy that is good? To what degree is our taste the product of our external senses only, and to what degree does it arise as character within ourselves? The reason for this analysis is the hope that somewhere in this procedure we will discover that we like something that is essentially good. It may be an extremely simple thing. The simpler, the better. If it is extremely simple, it is shabui, it is true maturity. But it must be something in ourselves that would enjoy knowing more, being more, possessing more of culture in its own nature. Perhaps it is an instinctive love of nature. Perhaps we wish we could get out, away from cities a little more often, to the enjoyment of the country life. But when we get out into the country, we look around for a few minutes, eat lunch, and come home. We do not know why we go. Until today, our idea of a peaceful vacation in the country is to tear down the road at 60 miles an hour from morning till night. This is completely without culture. It is without this mature thing that we're trying to find. What is it that gives us a certain sense of value? With most persons, it is something of a creative nature when it is discovered, because man is most frustrated today in the expression of his own creative instincts. Perhaps it is to make something or to draw a picture. Perhaps it is some craft or trade, but it is something in which the individual feels that if he did that and did it well, he would enjoy it. The only catch is learning how to do it, and that seems to be the great obstacle, the great difficulty. One thing that we learn from the study of Eastern philosophy and culture is that there are two ways of doing things. And usually in the West, we use the more difficult way. Inside of man, there is a doing things power. And there are persons who are born, apparently, with the knack to do things. They never studied how. But you give them a hammer and some nails and some boards and tell them what you want, and out of a kind of common sense within themselves, they will produce the product. And they will instinctively use methods that are approved by more skillful persons. Why? Because those are the best ways of doing that particular thing. And there are people who have this natural knack of simply sensing the proper procedures and following this sensing, this instinctive power to do things well. There are others who seemingly are totally without this faculty. They cannot drive a nail in without hitting their finger. They do not have this natural common sense. Now, we cannot say that everyone's allotment of this is equal, but usually there is an allotment. The man who cannot drive the nail has some other allotment. The man who drives the nail may not have some allotment in a different department of living. But somewhere in each individual there is an instinct to creativity. And there is also some kind of an instinct to do things well. It is hidden somewhere. To ferret it out, to discover it, to release it, becomes a very important task. The moment we discover what we are interested in, the moment we resolve to be interested in something, the faculty of attention is automatically stimulated, because attention follows interest. As we advance an interest, we become attentive to the signs and symbols associated with that interest. The individual who has a little craft shop, in a course of a few years, becomes an expert on almost every phase of such endeavor. His interest reaches out. We find him reading the catalogs, experimenting with various types of equipment, using this equipment to make various kinds of articles. I know one man that started out with about $60 worth of woodworking tools and ended up as an expert on antique furniture. He couldn't stop. He didn't intend to be an expert on anything when he started. I think his real intention was to get out of the house, because it was rather well loaded with relatives at the moment. But he developed an interest. This interest suggested a little more equipment. Well, equipment is nice, but you just can't pile it up. Equipment suggests almost inevitably that you do something with it. If the equipment itself does not do this, the neighbors will. They'll lean over the fence and say, "What are you making this week?" And you can't very well say, "Oh, I don't make things, I just buy equipment." So, by degrees, the individual was lured into experimentation. He hadn't gotten very far with his experimentation when certain other faculties began to appear in his consciousness. He began by nailing boards together. After he had nailed several items into units, he began to object to the look of the nails. Nails do not look nice showing on the surface of good furniture. So he began to figure that this was a sloppy way of doing it, and he'd better learn a better way. So for several weeks he studied all the intricacies and ins and outs of glue. He bought all kinds of glue. He became practically an authority on glue. Now, if you had told him, when he bought his first little wood-turning equipment, that he would someday be an authority on glue, he would have laughed at you. He would say, "Who wants to be?" But when glue became necessary as the next thing he needed to know to gratify himself, he learned about glue. This led to varnishes, and he really did smell up the neighborhood. But in the end, he found the varnishes he wanted. Well, it's nice to glue boards together and varnish them, but after all, there's not much good of gluing together a beautiful form or structure and varnish it beautifully and then end up with an orange crate. That doesn't seem to mean too much. His equipment and all his efforts were producing only mediocrity, things that he could buy better somewhere else. So next came the study of furniture. Pretty soon he began to understand the difference between Chippendale and some other English school. He became an expert on Hepplewhite and everything you can think of. He was actually the envy of the neighborhood. He could use words that no one else had heard before, and he seemed to know what they meant. This distinction played somewhat upon his ego. Some of the kids next door came over to watch him. Very soon he had apprentices, and in time this became important. Now, we're not saying that this is the answer as an activity. We don't mean that everyone should now go out and buy a lathe. But what we mean is that any line of interest which once takes hold of consciousness causes the individual to increase his area of awareness. He needs to know more. He must know more to keep up with his own interest. So the main thing is to move the person out of the static of no interest, to set him in something. Instinctively, the thing we are seeking for in interest, or by means of interest, is value. There must be some value in things well done. There must be some value in the right kind of varnish. Violin makers have struggled for centuries to discover the perfect varnish. The discovery of this varnish is only possible as the result of the deep analysis of many different factors and elements. The wood cannot be separated from the varnish, nor the varnish from the wood. These things have to be studied together. The purpose of all of these efforts is perfection, the achievement of a better degree of self-efficiency. And this type of perfection cannot be attained apart from the contemplation of natural phenomena. The individual, whether he knows it or not, is exploring the mysteries of life. For everything we do because of facts that exist in the universe. And as we tune in upon these facts, we gain a certain factual satisfaction. The person's achievement, even in a simple way, is harmonious with the determination or the purposes of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness expands, consciousness rejoices, is more comfortable, because it is being used as it was intended to be used, and the result is a general satisfaction. And to this satisfaction may be added an improvement of health and disposition, probably increased economic value also to the person. These things then tell us we must take hold of a thread somewhere, and to that thread we must give a sufficient degree of attention, to the degree that this thread becomes a challenge. The moment we get to the degree of a challenge, Western man begins to sense something familiar to him. He realizes that a challenge is an invitation to some kind of a success greater than he has previously possessed. Very few can resist challenge once it is clearly indicated in themselves. So this challenge sets the person on the way to the development of attentiveness. He becomes more one-pointed. He develops depth penetration in area. He is not any more satisfied to go to the store and buy a 50-cent can of varnish. He becomes aware of the fact that this 50-cent product is exactly what it is advertised to be. It is a mediocre varnish that will please somebody who knows nothing about varnish. This product becomes an insult to the thoughtful person. And when we realize that most products today are aimed at the thoughtless, we can see how discrimination can cause the person to search for better ways of doing things. Now, there are occasions when probably no better way is necessary. But to live always in mediocrity, to live always in things that could be better and no one cares, is to deprive life of some of its finest and most interesting adventures. Now, every type of person has need for the development of a penetrating faculty or power. Attention always has to do with reasons, causes, and purposes. Man has come to the conclusion in this world in which we live that the reasons for things are hopeless mysteries, that the sources of things are unknowable, and that the ultimate of things cannot be prophesied. Living thus defeated by the limitation which he places upon his own mind, he loses the adventure of youth, which refuses to accept these negations. Actually, many things can be solved. Many reasons can be found. Many purposes can be analyzed. And many probable ends can be determined. They cannot, however, unless the individual gives the necessary consideration to the symbols, symptoms, signs, and indications by which such testimonies are made. So attention gives us an increasing sense of entering into the structure of things. And while today we are efficient, to a degree at least, in many matters, we are without this fuller participation in the total life of any object or subject which comes under consideration. Today, of course, it seems to me that our attention should be focused largely upon those values necessary to enrich life. It is not enough that we simply focus our attention on varnish. This is not the type of attention which perhaps is ultimate, but it is a wonderful way of training attention to gradually cause the individual to realize that thoughtfulness is fun instead of hard work, to get over the prejudice against thought, a prejudice that goes down into our language, so that all you have to do is to suggest that somebody think and you're accused of preaching. We are afraid of this faculty and have so labored our moralisms on it that it has become an unpleasant word for all concerned. The main purpose, of course, that we need is the kind of attention that gives us certain values in daily conduct. We need attention that could lead to courage. We need attention that could lead to faith or to hope. We need attention that would give us stronger foundations for friendliness. We need attention that will help us to solve difficulties due to prejudice or intolerance, these arising always from short-sightedness and lack of thoroughness of attention. We need to discover more and more the truths of things that make life more beautiful, more secure, more harmonious. Thus, our present need in attention is largely aesthetic or cultural. It is not so much today that we need better techniques. We are getting them all the time. What we are needing is better understanding, better value, better appreciation for other people, and better appreciation for our own potentials. So today in attention, we think largely of stimulating within the individual a constructive, idealistic, creative nature. We feel that these are the things which he desperately needs at the moment. One of the negative aspects of the attention problem is that anxiety, which is a negative kind of attention, will cause us to be hypercritical of the difficulties which surround us. We have a kind of attention which ferrets out the worst, because we have become accustomed to the idea that the worst is inevitable. We have therefore also come to overlook the good which might be recorded with the dangerous. We have gained a certain negative kind of attention which causes us to go through a situation and become aware only of its hazards, of its menace, and of its discomforts. What we need is an attention that gives us a greater sense of the value of things that are good. In education today, it is a rather observable and a rather lamentable fact that practically all of our weight in education is now devoted to scientific progress, to economic advancement. Classes which deal primarily with cultural subjects are seldom well attended. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, the individual has associated culture with poverty. He assumes that if he is creative, he will be penalized. He assumes that in the arts there is very little future at the present time for the average person, unless he is able to tie his art strongly to some commercial project. So creativity is not abundant in the curriculum. And at the present time, for example, in higher intellectualism, classes on psychology are having huge attendance. Faculties are being enlarged in this bracket continuously. The need, the practical economic future for these people is assured, and to the same measure, classes in philosophy, particularly classical philosophy, have dwindled to a minimum. We are not concerned, really, with these intangibles, but the lack of them is destroying everything that is tangible. We cannot differentiate as clearly as we would like to. There is no such dichotomy as we are attempting to impose upon knowledge. To meet this situation, the person has to work with himself. And we assume that nearly everyone who has become aware of the spiritual values of life has certain attentiveness which he is directing in these matters. But here again there is a certain amount of danger, because so many of these abstract values cannot attract the attention to anything factual. Contemplations of religious abstractions are certainly far better than no such contemplations, but they have a tendency also to be hazardous. They have a tendency to cause the individual to build his life upon ideas which he cannot prove, about which he has no valid certainties, and which must be held as convictions, acceptances, or rejections, but cannot be subjected to the ordinary applications by which we would seek to prove values in daily life. A great many religious attitudes simply could not be applied successfully. They remain popular merely because they are remembered or accepted, not because they are used. The fact that they are not used is probably part of the general inertia in which we very seldom use anything which presents difficulties or complications or demands a major change in conduct. Actually, therefore, religious ideas should be and must be attached to or associated with cultural ideas. The individual's ability to experience religion is related to his ability to recognize and experience sublimity. It is related to the emotional reaction that arises from great beauty and great sincerity. Without these emotional experiences, religion becomes a little too abstract to be serviceable in time of trouble. Thus, we have innumerable persons nominally religious who are receiving very little support from their religion when a condition arises which demands a spiritual decision. They are unable to make it. But they can, if they wish, gradually develop the ability to recognize that which is better and use this in the determination of conduct. Once we demand a certain superiority of attainment in ourselves, we find it more difficult to violate this inner standard. The person who sincerely recognizes value nearly always lives better than the person in whose life value is measured only in terms of cost, in the sense of price of things. If then you want to begin some little experience in attentiveness or a focusing of attention, try taking brief periods of mental activity and applying them directly and to full use in some small area where obviously thoughtfulness would be helpful. Be attentive quietly to the words of other people. Do not interrupt all the time. Now, what other people say may not be important, or may be important. But as Emerson pointed out, it is very difficult to listen to anyone very long without learning something. This idea that we can only learn from our mental equals or superiors, or that we can only learn from individuals whose opinions are similar to our own, these are wrong convictions. We can learn from everyone, but we have no time to learn because we have set up all forms of automatic barriers. We can't learn from the wrong person because he doesn't belong to the right party. We cannot learn from a certain neighbor because his social condition is not equal to our own, and therefore he obviously couldn't know anything that we do not know. You can't possibly imagine that a poor man can know anything that a rich man wants to know. These attitudes lock us in many instances. They lock us in religious subjects. We have great difficulty, for instance, in listening to the opinions on a religious level of a person whose beliefs we believe we have outgrown, or for which we have never had any affinity. Yet we can learn something from everyone. This religious person may have done other things in his life which would be very valuable for us to know if prejudice on his religion didn't lock us away from him. So attention begins by giving the best that you have to the stimulation that comes to you through the circumstances of life. If after you have listened attentively and thoroughly, you come to the natural decision that this information is not serviceable, you have lost very little. But you are so likely to have an adventure that it is well worthwhile. The same thing is to be found in appreciation of the simple things around us. The faculty of appreciation, or the power to appreciate, is a very warm, rich emotion. It binds things together, it heals wounds, it makes small things important. And also it makes important things seem small in the sense of intimate. They come closer to us, they are comprehensible to us. Appreciation prevents us from falsely worshiping, but it also gives us the power to accept in a very gentle and reasonable way the things that will help us. Attention must escape from the early frost of prejudice. The individual who locks his mind against anything is going to lose the opportunity to grow. He's even going to lose the opportunity to have an intelligent way to differ with his adversary. Because if he knows nothing about what his adversary thinks, he can never in any way refute him. The problem of, therefore, listening, observing, watching result in turn in attentiveness or attention. We become unconsciously or subconsciously continuously aware. Thus we are continuously awake, for awake is awareness. And the moment we are not aware, we're asleep on our feet. We become interested not in just things as they seem to be, but in the implications behind things. Attention is a kind of a drilling into things. It gradually saves us from surface decisions. It prevents us from judging by appearances and being wrong. Attention makes us more aware of the conduct of other people. And if we will practice the attentive consideration of small things for 6 months or a year regularly, making it a practice to have this enlarging awareness, we will not only end up at the end of the year with a better ability to recognize values, but like as not with more dollars in the bank, because we will have protected ourselves against the kind of exploitation which comes to people who sign checks without knowing what they buy, who agree to things without reading the small print. Attention means that whatever we are doing at that time, we give it all of ourselves. And when that particular thing is done, we put it away. If, however, we have given full attention to it while we were doing it, it is set in the memory. It is therefore available to us at any time when we need it. It will not escape, because it is deeply and adequately recorded. One of the powers that helps man is his own memory. But memory, which should be the record of our growth, and therefore the key to the richest of our experience mechanisms, memory is so spotty due to indifference that the individual has not available to him anything resembling the full pattern of what he has done. He has only remembered what he wanted to remember, and he has tried desperately to forget anything in which he himself was to blame or was inadequate. The result is his memory only comes to the final conclusion that he's a very much abused person. He has had an awful hard life. Well, a memory that can only bring that out of the past is deficient in nearly every phase of knowledge. The memory that can only end in self-pity has failed totally And it simply means that the individual gave no attention to anything which was contrary to his own personal psychological attitude. And at the end of 40 or 50 years, this attitude parrots back to him. He thinks it's true, but it isn't true, because it is a record that was built of untruth in the first place. And there is no greater untruth than a half-truth. And most people live with half of the truth, the half that serves them the best, or justifies them. If you have, however, a careful recording, it is not necessary for you to carry one unit of attitude into another bracket of living. You complete a project, you put that away, you do not need to think of it again. It is no longer on your mind, it is in yourself where it belongs and is always available. You then move into some other project. If 10 years later you need some fragment of fact from the old project, it comes to you by association. Everything that you have accomplished by attention is available when needed by association. The man who varnished the chair gives up the project for 25 years, and then someone says to him, "John, I've got a chair that needs a little varnish on it. What would you recommend?" Instantly, the varnish syndrome is available. We have varnish right now in all its phases. We've never forgotten it because we built it in. When someone comes to us and says, "I'm having trouble with the family," or "I have business problems," whatever we have actually achieved, whatever attention has clearly made a fact in our lives, is available instantly. Thus we can help people. Thus we can face emergencies ourselves, and we gain a reputation for being skillful in the management of our own affairs. Skillfulness is nothing but attentiveness paying off. It is the fact that we learned something, we made it part of ourselves, and that knowledge is available from now on. So gradually we become more adept at things. We live a little better life. Our friends say how lucky we are and wish they could do likewise, but they are unwilling to spend the time and the energy to attain these units of attentiveness. And there is no way, there's no royal road to getting them. The only way that helps is to begin by choosing things where there is natural inclination, and therefore where the task is the least odious. But in the Eastern way of life, everything becomes a matter of this attentiveness, a complete thoughtfulness about action. If every action is thought through, if we give all of ourselves to each thing that we do as we do it, and if we are neutral about action, determined in ourselves only that the best shall be done, and do not overwhelm our own morality with our ambitions or our ulterior motives, then the action unfolds. Attentiveness causes us to observe the hazards and the obstacles, and also makes available to us out of the reservoir of our previous achievements everything that we have that will help us to meet those obstacles. But if we live continuously thoughtlessly, we have nothing inside ourselves in an emergency. We have no immediate skill to give our attention to something. I knew a case of this in which a scatterbrained individual was finally pushed into a tremendous emergency where they had to think. The result was a total breakdown. The individual was hospitalized for months. he could not think. He had never learned how. He could not keep his mind on his problem. He was imposed upon in every direction. Anyone who flattered him owned him. And this situation could only arise in a totally superficial mind. Attention, attentiveness, these are the faculties by which we escape this terrible type of dilemma. We get a thoroughness in ourselves. This thoroughness becomes beautiful. It becomes helpful. It gives us increasing love of art and of value. It makes us sacrifice the lesser for the greater, not by a sense of duty, but by joy of realization. The individual who is more thoughtful is not merely a highbrow wandering around with a super intellect. A really thoughtful person is a very happy, normal, modest individual who has the strange ability to do things well. And this ability is useful to all of us. And it must be cultivated by keeping the mind on what we are doing and also keeping the consciousness on what we know we should be doing. And the combination is unbeatable. And if we will develop this faculty, we will all have richer lives, better and more valuable associations, and will observe more rapid progress in the unfoldment of our own higher faculties of consciousness. Time's up. Now, I have so many announcements to make this morning, I'm going to ask you to sit them out with me. Let's try and see if we can't get these all in. I first want, of course, call to your attention that next weekend, Saturday and Sunday, is our open house, and we think it's going to be the best one that we have ever had. I'd like to make note that on Saturday afternoon, that's next Saturday at 2:30 p.m., in the reading room, it's, I believe, the annex to our library, the extension, we're going to have an interesting guest. Mr. Isaku Nakagawa is going to bring to us the technique for the making of hand or woodblock prints. He is a distinguished artist from Kyoto, where he ranks with the great masters of long ago, Hiroshige, Utamaro, and the like, and he will demonstrate how these prints are made. He will actually make them here for us and show how this intricate method of woodblock printing is done in Japan. He is listed as one of the outstanding masters of his art at the present time. So to watch him work will certainly be interesting and an opportunity to give your attention to some new ideas. And you know, it'll be so much more interested in watching him work than it will be sitting home and worrying about the election, that we invite you all to come. Never sit home and worry when there is any place where you can learn something. It's much better to operate that way. Mr. Isaku will also exhibit a number of his scrolls and paintings for friends who are interested in seeing the work that he is doing. Also, don't forget the concert on Sunday afternoon at 4:30, when Mr. Rudolph Gruen is going to give a very wonderful concert for the benefit of the society. He's going to play an original composition of his own, which has won international recognition. He will play several short selections from outstanding composers and masters, and he will also play selections from the music of the Comte Saint-Germain, which he has arranged from the original score. We think this concert will be of very great interest to everyone. We appreciate the wonderful cooperation of Mr. Gruen in making this occasion possible, and we would point out that tickets for the concert can be secured this morning in the lobby, and also can be secured Wednesday night or Saturday afternoon or before the concert on Sunday. We hope, however, that all who can will secure their tickets in advance, and therefore that none of our close friends will be disappointed if accommodations are not adequate. So we hope that you will all be here on Saturday and Sunday for these wonderful occasions. Also, there is going to be a special door prize for our Sunday afternoon activity next week. One of the friends has very generously hand-bound a set of the articles on comparative religion from Life magazine. He has made a very handsome and attractive book out of the original articles. He has hand-bound this book in a very nice way, and it is to be offered as a door prize, I believe, on the open house. The tickets for this prize can also be secured in the lobby. The committee tells me that they are 50 cents each. If you should win the book, you do not have to be present at the time the book is awarded. All you have to do is have left your name and address, and you will be notified. Now also at 1:30 this afternoon upstairs, the PRS Center Study Group is meeting to discuss the talk of this morning, and we hope that you will all be there with lots of attention, and that might be a very wonderful opportunity to begin the disciplining of attention. That is, you know, the ability to stay awake while somebody else gets up and says something. Now this is not only attention, this is a sort of psychic courtesy. We hope that you'll all be there to practice your attention and to learn all you possibly can and discuss the lecture of the morning for purposes of self-help. Let me also point out that we are having the occasional coffee klatch this morning right after the lecture, and the friends, the committee, are inviting you to join with your friends in a cup of coffee to help you to revive from the heavy pressure of the morning. So we hope that you will all be there for that purpose. Next Sunday morning, our subject will be Oriental philosophy on the 7 principles of true wisdom. And we think this is going to be an interesting and unusual lecture, and we hope that you will all come. And if I've overlooked any announcements, I'm sincerely sorry. Some of the lecture material this morning will be found in some of our books, and as a kind of general beginner on this theme, perhaps our book Self-Unfoldment would be helpful to you. Now don't forget the coffee and the 1:30 occasion, and don't forget to set aside the next weekend for a rather interesting and important occasion. And some of the material which we are planning to exhibit over the weekend of the 29th and 30th will not be available afterwards. It will only be on exhibit during the open house. So whereas sometimes you can come in for a week or two afterwards and see the exhibits, this time the material will not be complete after Sunday.